We're just getting started. I was asked to make one announcement. That is, there's a need for extra large or large coat. We have somebody in need of a large coat. If anybody has one to donate, see Gary. Men's coat. Okay? See Gary if you have one. A large men's coat. Winter coat. Blazer or leisure? No, I'm kidding. Remember leisure suits? Oh man, hated those things. Well, it was fine except my brother and I had matching ones all the while growing up. You know, I had the blue with the white outline, white buttons. I had white dress shoes. I hope my mom's not watching. All right, so thank you for coming and tuning in to our Revelation study. Tonight we're doing just a little, we're going to do things just a little bit different, and I'll tell you why, and you'll get a couple of handouts that I'll have for you tonight as well. So we're in page 26 of the book, chapter 14 of the book of Revelation. This is one chapter tonight, chapter 14. It's called The Grapes of Wrath. How many of you saw the movie? You know, the grapes of wrath the title comes from what we read in this chapter tonight. So I don't have hardly any review right at the moment, but I want to get right into the book. I will tell you that tonight be a lot fewer slides because we're going to go through a handout, and I did not take the time to make slides for all the points on this handout, but this is the night. If you were wondering about the various views, this is the night that I'm introducing that, and I'm going to start with the unidentified symbols that I think I go from like chapters 11 up to the present to chapter 14. So you'll have Appendix A, and then we'll go through that, and I'm taking 5 views, and you have to realize that these views can be splintered off into various other subsection views. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I'm not touching on every single possibility, but I'll touch on a couple of the ones that you probably have noted before or have heard of before. So everybody okay? Chapter 14. We're over halfway there, guys, and you have survived. Have you been blessed? Okay, don't lie to me now, because Matt Fletcher, he told me a while ago that he snuck his head in here and asked how things were going, and y'all all said I was doing perfect. He either lied or that's true, or you lied to him. Okay, well, I don't think he used the word perfect, but I want to know that we're doing what we need to do to get us better acquainted with Revelation. I didn't do very well in algebra, and it took me several times to get it passed. But every time was a stepping stone, right? And then I met a teacher at Northern Oklahoma College in Tonkawa that just connected with me in a way that no algebra teacher ever connected before. Plus, in our church, I had a whiz kid in our youth group that tutored me, and I got an A in college algebra. You can't believe how many times I tried and had to drop, or tried and got a low grade. I just was not that great. When numbers get mixed up with letters, things go wonky for me, okay? Anybody in the same boat as I am? I'm in good company? Good. I'm glad for that. Why I bring that up is just to tell you that this may be your first go-around for Revelation, to have an in-depth study, to be as invested. Guess what? It shouldn't be your last. How many of you have been through Revelation before? Maybe you remember Monty taking you through it or somebody else taking you through it, and this is something maybe you've done on your own. How many of you went to OC and took Stafford North's class on Revelation? Yeah, I figured there'd been more. Yeah, that's Stafford's book right there. And really, as a prerequisite with Stafford North, you were supposed to have taken, didn't have to, it's not really a prerequisite, but it was, the general order was to do Daniel first and then do Revelation, because there was a lot of connections there. Okay. I plan to do this. I'm going to do some podcasts. You've heard me say that before. That will be a little bit more polished of what you're getting. It's not going to be new or different, really. But I am actually considering a sermon series. Now, this is not going to be a sermon series that's going to touch on all the facets we're touching on in this classroom. So it's not 15 parts of a sermon series. But I'm going to find the messages that I think are pertinent and relevant and interesting, compelling, and I'm running out of adjectives because I didn't look at the thesaurus. But anyway, you're going to see how this can turn into a sermon series partly tonight when I give you, I think, what the main thing is. I think the main thing about Revelation is in our chapter we're looking at tonight. I think the key verse, if you were to narrow it down, Lanny, what is the main message of the book of Revelation? It's in this chapter, chapter 14, and we'll see if you have a good guess of what verse I might be referring to in just a moment. Let's go ahead and open up our Bibles to chapter 14. I call it the Grapes of Wrath, and let's do our reading. Here we go. Everybody there? Revelation 14. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters, like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps, and they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as firstfruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth. To every nation, tribe, language, and people, he said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." A second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries." A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. There will be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus." Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." "Yes," says the Spirit, "they will rest from their labor, from their deeds. for their deeds will follow them. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had in charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles, for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Okay? So, looking at our bullet points, John sees 144,000, right? They have the Lamb's name, they have the Father's name written on their foreheads. Some of you may be familiar with a religion that believes the 144,000 that we first were introduced to in chapter 7 and are now mentioned here in chapter 14 refers to the only ones that are going to go to heaven, literally. And that the rest of God's people will stay on a recreated earth, a new heaven, a new earth. They go to that verse. But they look at this verse and say, only 144,000. Talking with some that are from this religion, they call these people that are of the special, the elite, the anointed ones. The anointed ones. You probably know the religion I'm referring to. How many of you heard of this, that only 144,000 are going to heaven? Back in the mid-90s, or maybe, mid-90s, I think Lexi and I were still living in Alva, so I think it would have been early 90s. We were married in 90, right? Okay. And it was probably about 91 or 92, a couple of representatives from this religion came knocking on our little house's door while I was gone. And she's never let me forget that. And they wanted, of course, to give her some material and to engage her in a study. During that time, the preacher at Alva named Bob DuPont and myself started to get acquainted with one of these guys that had come around. And he had material, and he gave me some books, and of course he's promoting their agenda. And as we're discussing things, Bob and I are both asking him questions, because we were curious to know, why do you believe the things that you believe? And in Alva, there was a rather large meeting place for this group. And he told me at that time, this would have been 91, 92, he told me at that time that of the 144,000 spots, only 10,000 spots remained. And he said, and there's one here in Alva, a member of our group, that was believed to be one of the anointed ones that would fill one of the 10,000 spots remaining. I thought that's interesting, and here we are in 2025. I don't know where this guy is, if he's still in Alva. I'd like to ask him how many spots are left now. Because I want in, don't you? I want in. Here's the thing about, I'm not making fun of anybody's religion. This is not what I'm here to do. My job as a preacher is to not make fun of people. Now, I might be critical and I might analyze, but I don't want to make fun. But here's the rule of interpreting symbols. You can't take a set of symbols and separate out of the same set what you want to be literal and the rest you want to keep in the figurative mode. When you look at, when I say set of symbols, I'm not talking about all the set of symbols that are in all the book of Revelation, but I'm talking about whatever is a descriptor of this particular symbol. If you're taking one thing as literal, you have to take all of it as literal. Do you follow what I'm saying? And if you were to do this with the symbol of 144,000, then here's what you would come up with. First of all, if that's literal, then they're all men. No women in heaven. And they have to be Jew. Because in chapter 7, it says that this number is derived by 12,000 from each tribe. And furthermore, in chapter 14, they did not defile themselves with women, and it specifically says they are what? Virgins. And then also, they are literally perfect, or I think the text in the NIV says blameless, no lie in their mouth. 144,000 Jewish men who are still virgins that are perfect. But the group that believes the number 144,000 are the only spots remaining is 10,000, but only 144,000 get to heaven. They do not see these other components of that same symbol as being literal. Just the number part of it's literal. So there's a problem there. There's an inconsistency there. We'll get to what other views might say about 144,000 and what you and I might believe about that number, but I just wanted to go ahead and mention that up front. We know that they have not defiled themselves with the women. They've remained virgins. But if it's a symbol, this is a symbolic language, right? They follow the Lamb everywhere, having been purchased, and another word for purchase here would be redeemed, from mankind, offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. Verse 5 says, no lie found in their mouths, they're blameless. Then John saw another angel flying with a gospel message, that's in verse 6, proclaiming this. Verse 7, let's read that one again. He says in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs of water. And then a second angel was following and proclaims this in verse 8. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wines of her adulteries. And a third angel comes proclaiming this in verses 9 through 11. I won't read all of that again. John records that the vision of the three angels calls for patient endurance, and that God's people needed to keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. Then John heard a voice from heaven saying, those who die in the Lord are blessed. This is the second beatitude, the second time in Revelation we have a blessing. There's going to be a third time, but we had the first one. Blessed is the one who reads this out loud, right? Here's another blessing passage. And then John hears a voice from heaven. The next thing John saw was one that looked like the Son of Man sitting on a white cloud, wearing gold crown, holding a sharp sickle. Another angel's heard, take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come. The one on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and it's harvested. Another angel comes out. He's holding a sickle, so there's two sickles. Then an angel in charge of the fire at the altar instructed this angel, take your sharp sickle, gather the cluster of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe. From a general standpoint, there's two sickles. How are the first and second sickles contrasted here? And you can do this in a very general way. Okay, okay, they're both sharp. They are both sharp. Does it sound like you'd want to be a part of the first harvest? Does it sound like you'd want to be a part of the second harvest? Doesn't sound like I want to do that one. Who wants to be a part of the first harvest? Right? How many times does the Bible talk about our soul-winning efforts, all evangelism, our mission work, our gathering and making disciples of all nations? How many times does the Bible compare that to agriculture in sowing and reaping? What are some of the examples throughout Scripture that you can think of where either Jesus or others talked about the idea of growing as God's kingdom in agricultural terms? Go. Plant and water. One sows, another waters. God gives the increase. Paul wrote that in 1 Corinthians, didn't he? Very good. Yes, Karen. This is a passage Kent Sampson read just last Sunday morning out of Luke chapter 10. He said, the fields are white in a harvest. Pray the Lord to send out workers in the field. He was talking about souls, wasn't he? The parable of the sower and the soils. There's 4 different kinds of soils. There's this good soil, and you can plant and reap a good harvest there because it's fertile and it's productive. And then there's this soil over here that's on a hard path, or there's this soil over here that the thorns will grow up along and choke it, or birds will pluck the seed out of the ground. And I don't know if you know the damage. What do you call a flock of geese? Is it a flock? I guess it is a flock. Have you a gaggle? Okay. Does anybody know what a group of turkeys is called? Don't say it yet. Is it rafter? A rafter, yeah. I don't know why I went there, but anyway, that's irrelevant. Sorry. But as you can tell, agriculture was a sign of the times. I mean, it was something that Jesus walking along could point to because it's all around. Look at that. The harvest is white. I mean, the field is white to harvest. Or you have the wheat in the tares analogy when it comes to the day of judgment, which lends the idea of that's harvest. How do you harvest? It's not with a John Deere combine, is it, or a gleaner? It's with a sickle. And we have that all through Scripture. And there's the examples of Ruth and Boaz in that book about the gleanings, that people from the area could come behind and get the gleanings from the harvest. And you reap what you sow. Paul's analogy about if you sow good, what are you going to reap? Good. If you sow bad, what are you going to reap? A man reaps what he sows. And so that just goes on and on and on. We're talking about a harvest here. We're talking about a taking and gathering up of God's people, it seems. But the second harvest is about the other side of judgment. Because you got the ones that'll go to the right, and you have the ones that are going to go to the left. You have the sheep, you have the goats, you have the wheat, you have the tares. And so there are the different ways of the judgment being pictured there. And then the angel harvested the grapes, threw them into the great winepress, and this is outside the city that blood flows. And I think this is a direct correlation. I agree with Tim Piles. I think this is a direct correlation to what happens outside the city of Jerusalem where our Lord was crucified and blood flowed at Calvary. And not just his, but a lot of people's blood flowed outside the city. And it's symbolic, I believe, of all the persecution and all the bloodshed that's going on all over the world. So that's it in a nutshell. That's it in a nutshell. Now, let me ask you, are there any questions over this chapter before I move on? I don't want to leave anything behind. Are there any questions about what's going on here? Jim? So this is a good question. Obviously, John 15, I am the vine, you are the branches, and of course it's implied there that you bear fruit, and if you don't, you're cut off. There's also this imagery Paul will use that some are cut off and some were grafted in, talking about Jews losing and Gentiles gaining access to God's people in that relationship. And there are images throughout Old Testament like Isaiah that talk about God's vineyard. The vine of Satan. Well, where's Frank? Oh, who wants to be Frank? I believe, now, okay, so I'm thinking about Jesus, for example, who says, you can know, and this is a tree instead of a vine, you'll know a tree by the fruit that it bears. A good tree bears good fruit, bad tree bears bad fruit. So it's identified as the people, I believe, that have followed not after the Lamb, but they have followed after the dragon and his cohorts. All of Satan's machinery that's out there. And I almost want to say that this vine is associated with God. It represents his wrath. So Romans 11 verse 22 says this about God. Behold both the goodness and the sternness or severity of God. Goodness to those who are doing what he said. I'm paraphrasing now. I'm not quoting directly. Goodness to those who are, keeping what, I should salute somewhere. Where am I saluting? But sternness or severity to the ones that don't follow God. That's hugely chopping that verse up bad. But that's the dual nature of God, that he wants to favor you and show kindness to you, but he is a God that means what he says, and sin does not go unpunished, and he punishes sin. And can God get mad? Is there a wrath of God? Romans chapter 1 talks about the wrath of God, doesn't it? The wrath of God has been revealed. And here it's being revealed for people that have turned their back on him. So, yeah, it is a representation of those who have been under Satan's influence, but it's God to hold the vengeance. So grapes of wrath, I think it's representing the wrath of God. So I don't know. There might be other ways to explain that, but that's my initial response. Any other questions? Yes, Mary. Well, that is correct. Now, what I was referring to was the religious belief that only 144,000 are literally going to heaven, meaning that they'd also have to be all men, all Jews, all virgin, all perfect. Now, we are perfect in this respect, Mary. God gave Jesus to die for our sins, right? And his blood has washed me. And what God sees now in me is through the blood of Jesus. So what he sees is perfection. This concept, by the way, is called propitiation. Propitiation means a covering. My sins are covered. There's other ways of saying my sins have been expunged. I have remission of sins. I have forgiveness of sins. That does not mean that I am a perfect person living my life perfectly, but in Jesus, I have continued forgiveness of sins. Does that make sense? So 1 John chapter 1 describes a continuing action of this forgiveness. It doesn't just happen that one time I stood before the congregation and answered that preacher's question when he said, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? And I said, I do. And he took me into the baptistry and immersed me. It continues like a windshield wiper. Now, I don't know about y'all. My windshield wipers go like this. I've got two of them going on maybe. But yeah, it continues to do that. And that's life living under grace. That just continues. His blood's still flowing. And it's flowing everywhere. Go ahead, Mary. I believe, and I think most here would agree, that what I said only pertains to this one particular group's view. I believe that our view would be this is a representation of all of God's people, not gender specific, not literally Jews, but by spirituality, we are spiritual Israel in that sense. And we're perfected because of the blood of the Lamb. We've been redeemed. It says that in the text that we're purchased from the earth. So that's the called out, the bought out. So I believe it's the church. I believe it's us as Christians today, men and women. For in Christ there is not male, female, Jew, Gentile, slave, or free, right? So that's in Galatians 3. So I would use that to say, I believe that's what 144,000 is depicting for us, is it's all of God's people, not just physical, literal Israel. It's not literal. It is just a imagery or symbol of the whole collective. We'll see some of the other views when I pass out the sheets in a moment. Well, this is what the angel told John in chapter 7. Yeah, it's depicted from the 12,000 from this tribe, the 12,000 from this tribe, and it all adds up to 144,000. Yes, Robert. No, it's direct correlation to where Jesus was crucified outside the city. In other words, Rome was crucifying people outside the city limits. And, you know, being the outside of the city, I'm saying, is a way of saying the detestable gets expunged. You're shoved out there. You're an outcast. It's just symbolic of that. Yeah, and there's a typology in there too of Old Testament practices of the scapegoat, that once the priest laid his hands and all those sins in the atonement process are transferred to the goat, what happened to the goat? Sent outside the city. All right, any other questions? Yeah, did you find the verse? Did you figure out the verse that I think is the central verse? Let me look at 7. Wow, 7 is pretty good, but that wasn't the answer. That's not the answer either. 12. That's the main point of the whole book of Revelation, is to get us to have patience. To have patience. Now, that's my answer, okay? And 7 is a good one, though. But I will say a lot of people point to verse 12 and say, this is the key verse. This whole book is what it's doing for the 7 churches of Asia. And here's what it's doing for us today. It's calling for us to be what? Patient. It calls for patient endurance. And there's some reasons for that. I think I want to get this out of order a little bit, because it's halftime. Halftime review, right? Here's some things we've seen in the previous chapters, and we're going to lead up to this. This war started in heaven. It's chapter 12, verse 7. War broke out in heaven. That's where it starts. And by the way, I think the heavy lifting of the war, the battle, is not done by people. I think it's done by good forces over evil forces. The heavy lifting of the battle, of the spiritual warfare, is taking place kind of behind the veil, behind the curtain. War broke out in heaven. What did Paul write in Ephesians chapter 6? Our battle is not with what? Flesh and blood, but it's about things that are going on in heavenly places. Are we affected? Yes, we are affected. But this war is either going to be won or lost in heaven, not here. And it started there. So what happens when war broke out in heaven? Satan got kicked out, didn't he? Now, that's just the start of the fact that Satan is a short timer. I'm using Tim Pyle's wording here. I like this wording. He calls him a short timer. And when we were looking at for the last couple of weeks, Kim, you said you missed a couple of weeks. He had a good excuse. He had a doctor's note, I think. We were looking at these time frames of, what was it, 1,260 days, a time, times, and half a time, 42 months. This translates to basically 3.5 years. These are all referring to the same time span of how long Satan tries to persecute, of how long the church, God's people, have to go in hiding, of how much longer to answer the question of the souls that have been martyred under the altar. Must this go on? How long? This was the time. And when you look at the time, 3.5 years, you're counting 1, 2, 3, and you want to try to get to 4, but you don't get to 4, you get 3.5. In other words, time cut short. It's all a symbol to give us the idea that while this may seem like a long time, it's not forever. And when you look back on things in your life, you might think, man, that was a tough period of my life. And boy, when I was in that, I thought this was eternity. But looking back on it, hindsight's 20/20, right? How many of you can attest to the fact that you can look back on places in your life where you had trouble, but now it kind of seems short? It seemed like maybe a blip. I mean, those are times that we can go back to and really figure out. Here's what he's saying to the church. That this won't go on forever. Now, you and I might think, 2,025 years since, the beginning of this new time thing with Jesus in it and all that, and that's a long time. Is it? Really? Compared to eternity, what's 2,025 years going to look like? How long have y'all lived? Somebody here I know is, yeah. I think he's fixing to get older. But he's close, right? Just picking on you, Jack. We love you. But in true reality, James would say, what is life? It's a what? Vapor or a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes away, right? It will seem as if it's not. I mean, I think of better not say that. Tim's going back there. No, don't do it. I just think that maybe some things that I go through, it seems like, man, this is taking too long. This is forever. When in actuality, it's not in comparison to the bigger picture of things. And because of that, Satan knows he's a short timer. Guess what the big difference between God and Satan is? Or Jesus and Satan? Satan has an end. He is finite. Have you ever thought about that? Satan is finite. You need to know that. God's not. Jesus is not. And because of Jesus, you're not and I'm not. Jesus says, I'm the resurrection and the life. Though this man be dead, yet shall he live. John 11:25. That cannot be said about Satan. Isn't that neat? I mean, that's good. That's good news, right? Satan is defeated. And so when he knows, and he already knows this, I believe that when John, before he ever picks up the quill or the cuneiform stick or whatever it is he's using to record these words down, it's before then that Satan knows he's already lost this thing. But the next best thing he can try to do is chase after the offspring of this child. Remember going back to the woman and the dragon and the child, right? The woman being Israel, bringing forth the Messiah into the world, and he wants to devour, but he's ascended, he's taken up. When in Genesis 3:15 you had that messianic prophecy about the bruising of the heel and the bruising of the head, that was the prophecy that sealed Satan's doom, and it's fulfilled when Jesus resurrected from the dead. And he knows it. He knows it. Trust me, he knows he lost. He's a short timer. Boy, I spent a lot of time on that. The bulk of this war has already happened, by the way. The heavy lifting, I mentioned that a while ago, but the bulk of it has already happened. It's still happening, but for the early church, from their perspective, it's done. The early Christians, all those people that would have heard the first time that letter was ever read, whether that's the church at Ephesus, Pergamum, Thyatira, Laodicea, no matter where it was, it's a done deal. They've already died. They've already died. Do they have victory? You bet they do. Because of the key verse that you wanted to be the key verse. Verse 13, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. It's done. That's going to be true of us at some point, right? Do you believe this? I do. All right, I'm getting preachy. This is where it turns into the sermon, see? There's more to come, but there's an end. And the end has already been determined. So I've said that, but here's the verse. It calls on our part then for patient endurance. Okay, let's do this because this might take a little bit of time. Let me see how to do this. So these are cross-stacked. It's 3 pages each. I'll send one down this middle. I'll send, let's see if I can find the break. There's the break. Take one stack of 3 papers, and this is a comparative views list. I have another Appendix B that I'm not going to pass out, but I'm going to leave it out there. You can grab on the way in because we're not going to refer to this tonight. But I'll just quickly say, this is on the gematria. The gematria is how we view the number 666, the number of the beast or the number of man. And this is a way of saying if you take the Hebrew letters of the alphabet and spell out Nero's name with a little variant of his spelling, you'll get the total of 666. So some people think this refers to Nero, and there's that Nero redivivus theory that you can go and look up. But somebody asked for this the other day, and I told them I would make a copy. So this is the Hebrew alphabet that gives you the number value to each one of the letters of the alphabet, and how Nero's name in Hebrew, by the way, and there are tons of names, whether you're using Hebrew or Greek or Aramaic or Latin, where you can get the letters to total up to, guess what, 666. If you use the Greek alphabet, Muhammad totals 666. So it's something scholars are aware of. I'll put this back here on the back. I'll put it on this stool back here. All right. Has it made it to the back? Oh, that air there. You can just collect them there. One handout is 3 pages, and I told the copier to 3-hole punch it, and it didn't do that. Sorry. The copier does 3-hole punch. But it didn't do it, and I don't know why. All right, so here's where we get introduced to the various views. I'm going to choose the 5 major ones. And I'll try to remember which authors, which preachers, which churches kind of hold to these views. But I'm going to go ahead and list them up here for those of you online that don't have this handout in front of you. The first one is the futurist view, is that right? So futurist view, also known as the dispensationalist view. What do I have next? Preterist. Preterist view that everything in Revelation has already happened for the most part. What's next? Historical. So this is where the view of Revelation is a history record for mankind. And then what I have? Idealist. This is more of the philosophical view. where everything's generalized and not specifically tied up to symbols, that it's ongoing, it happens in each generation. No one single figure or event is tied down. It reoccurs till Jesus comes. And then there's what's called the continuous historical. And I have seen this named several different things, but it's kind of a combination between some preterist and idealist combined. That, yes, the preterists, for example, these are things that must shortly come to pass. In other words, they're saying it all happened within the immediate context of when these first century Christians were still alive. Continuous historical agrees, but says it doesn't stop there, that it can be applied further. So we're going to see the nature of this. I chose just a few of these symbols. The first one I chose was the two witnesses, or also known as the two olive trees. There's also a lampstand involved with this. This imagery came from Zechariah chapter 4, another apocalyptic book, if you recall from last week. Here's what the futurist view says of the two witnesses. That this is Enoch and Elijah. Why would they say that? Because in the passage that you find that they were taken to heaven. And these are the two known people that were taken to heaven without dying. That's a plausible answer. Preterist view states that these are the figures from the past symbolizing first century Christians during the Jewish-Roman War. They're not identified specifically, but they are witnesses to what happened before 70 AD. So right now you can already tell that a preterist believes that the book of Revelation was written before 70 AD, and the bulk of its story has to do with the fall of Jerusalem. We have several in the church that are authors and preachers that hold to this view. If you were here when I said, okay, so if you were here when I said this is not going to make sense. I offer this as a counter to holding that view. Why on earth would you write to 7 churches in Asia about their persecution, but it all be about actually what's going to happen in Jerusalem hundreds and hundreds of miles away? That doesn't make sense to me. I think, Robert, one of the first questions you asked when we started this study was, why these 7 churches? If it was about the fall of Jerusalem, who do you think John would be writing to? The church at Jerusalem. But he's not, because I don't think it is. But they do believe, and you're going to see as we follow the preterist view, they believe that we're talking about persecution at the hands of Nero, who died in 68. Committed suicide, body never found. This is part of the Nero Redivivus theory. I'm probably saying that word wrong. Preterist views, okay, you got that. The historical view varies. It just depends who you talk to. Enoch or Elijah, or Moses and Elijah, or it's the Old Testament and New Testament. Those are the witnesses. Or it's the law and it's the prophets. Remember how Jesus sometimes distinguished the law from the prophets? That he read from the law and then from the prophets? Or he talked about on this hangs all the law, and then other times he talks about the prophets. So he distinguishes them. Idealist view says this is all about testimony and proclamation. In other words, what's being preached and what's being shared in people's experiences are the symbols of these witnesses. The continuous historical view, Moses and Elijah. Because, again, going back to the reference, there was one who worked plagues, and there was another who prayed that it would stop raining. And guess how long it had stopped raining when Elijah prayed that it wouldn't rain? Oh, I'll erase the numbers. 3.5 years, yeah. So that's the two witnesses. Let's move on down. A beast from the abyss. Futurists, they like to, the Antichrist is going to be a lot of their answers. But this is Antichrist with a 10-king coalition. Okay? Preterist view, this is a military power of Rome. Historical view, it's a symbol of spiritual and political oppression. Idealist and continuous historical kind of is the same. It's the overall battle between good and evil that's still going on today. The pregnant woman, the lady about to give birth, nation of Israel. Preterist says primarily Israel, but ultimately the church. Historical nation of Israel, or Mary, or a composite of God's people throughout history. Idealist view, a symbol of ongoing, timeless conflict. No one event, no one individual, and continuous historical view. This is God's people, Israel. Beast from the sea, I won't read all these. But as you can see, again, they're in keeping with idealist view, for example. You're going to see that a lot, ongoing cosmic conflict. It's just things that repeats itself all the time. And preterist view, they're going to be tied to anything that's pre-70 AD. The beast from the earth. Let's go back to the beast of the sea. The beast of the sea serves at the pleasure of the red dragon. Now, he's not listed here. Why did I not list him here? Because he's identified. He is that ancient serpent from old. He is Satan himself. I'm not giving you what the Bible's already given you. I don't have the lamb on here because you know who he is. Do I have the child? You know who the child is, right? I don't think I listed the child. But we do have the pregnant woman. Okay, and the beast of the sea. Okay, he gets power from the dragon. And something I haven't touched on yet, but a lot of commentators say this. I can't remember if Godfrey does. I know Tim Piles does. I think Ian Fair does. Sea is always a representation of chaos. And usually chaos is born out of some curse or something that's not right. Chaos is a symbol of something that is the effect of what Satan or evil has caused. It's that cause-effect thing. Now, you do have a picture of the sea in the throne room, and it's crystal, right? But guess what? The sea's been calmed because Satan's not there. But this sea is a picture of things that are not pleasant, things coming out of it. And so I think that was important to bring up. And the beast of the earth serves at the pleasure of the beast of the sea. He is the one that is enforcing the worship of the beast of the sea. And so the various views of who this is, preterists believe Nero, and of course that makes sense with the number of the beast using the gematria. And I believe it to be the emperor cult, that the beast of the sea is Roman Empire, the government, and the emperor cult would be a collection of its priests and Caesars, the emperors themselves, with emphasis during the first century on Domitian, being the bloodthirsty Caesar he was. Preterists would say, no, it's Nero. But if you remember, the beast of the sea has how many heads? Is it 7, 10? I forget. But one of the heads looks like it has a fatal wound, but is resurrected, right? So when you go to the fatal wound, that's the belief that Domitian is like a Nero. Okay. We talked quite a bit about Mark of the Beast last time, but we do believe that it be some documentation, whether it's a coin that's got an image of an emperor stepped on the head, or it's of course, futurists are saying barcode. I don't know why they don't go on to QR codes now, but a microchip implanted or whatever it might be, that's the mark of the beast. I'm not trying to make fun. I'm telling you what they believe, okay? But it's some documentation that says you can't go to, let's put it in our terms, you can't go to Homeland and buy food. Your money's no good there. Your credit card's no good there unless you can show proof that you stopped by the temple and paid homage into the shrine and you received documentation that you were there. Economic boycotting of the church. Because if you go to the temple and pay homage to that, what are you giving your allegiance to? The emperor, imperial Rome. And that was necessary. About all the views agree with that, generally speaking. But as to what it was specifically, that can vary. The number of the beast, remember last week too, though, 616 is actually a number that's found in a lot of the manuscripts instead of 666. But it basically is this: it's the number of man. It says that in the text, so it's kind of identified in a way. What day was man made on? What number would you give God? That's perfection. Man's just falls short of God. So that's why I put the 6 as lesser than 7 there to kind of give us that. The 144,000, I've already said what I believe that is. There's other views there. Then you have the 3 angels. The preaching of the gospel seems to make sense on all the views. The second angel, it's a pronouncement of judgment on Rome. Even the preterists say pronouncement of judgment on Rome because they were responsible for the fall of Jerusalem, right? It's a judgment against Rome. The third angel, a final call to either worship the beast or follow the Lamb. Make your choice, the opportunity to choose who to follow. They're all, generally speaking, agreeing on that. The first sickle and the second sickle, Robert Godfrey says that the first sickle is actually correlated to the rapture, the collection of God's saints before the tribulation takes place. So it's preserving the saints at hand so they're spared the tribulation. So it falls in line with the premillennial view, and that the second sickle is what is referred to a lot of times as the great white throne judgment or final judgment. I believe the first sickle is those who have died are already locked in. They're already preserved. They're not going to lose their salvation. Those of us who have not died, we who remain, will one day be gathered with those that Jesus brings back with them, right? We will not precede those who have fallen asleep. That's what I think the first and second sickles are representing. The wine press, most of this is pretty common. All right, I hope that helps you a little bit. I think there was 2 bells, so I'm going to stop with that. Again, this was a little different tonight, not a lot of slides. It was just one chapter, but it's halftime. I wanted to give you that, a little bit of things to add. I'm going to add more next week. Hope you have a great week. See you Sunday.